Hello, my name's Chris, what's yours? Welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me as the third Doctor's era surprises me yet again. If there's one thing Pertwee's time on the TARDIS does for me, it's keep me on my toes. I don't think I've ever had the same experience twice with it. I used to never really look forward to it, and then I used to look forward to it very much. And in fact, this time it was probably the era that I was looking forward to reaching the most. And these days I find myself really impressed with him on the whole, and by his blistering first season, and as a result I end up always feeling like sort of slightly giddy for the rest of the era. And then season 8 starts to present me with facets of the Doctor that I don't much care for, and I start to wonder if I'm going to revert back to not liking him as much. Then it adds a potentially dazzling companion played by an outstanding performer who it then turns out is given fairly short shrift. So, a little deflated, I get whiplash again when season 8 starts to turn it around and pick up some absolutely fantastic momentum. Before I then approach Day of the Daleks quite cautiously, because it's been very up and down for me, and the last time it was down, only to find this time it was up again. And as a result, I get really excited for the rest of season 9, because I know that there are 3 stories within season 9 that I really quite like. The Curse of Peladon doesn't disappoint, and the Sea Devils proceeds to surpass even my quite high expectations. And so we come to the 2 remaining stories of season 9, and with 3 that I really like, it surely can't be the Time Monster, can it? Not that one that gets lambasted to within an inch of its life. It surely must be the Mutants. Well, no, the Mutants is not it. Now, obviously I'll talk more about the Time Monster in the next video on the marathon for obvious reasons, but I've always found the Mutants pretty tough going. So it's safe to say that the Pertwee years is proving to be the biggest roller coaster on this marathon so far. And it's not just the stories themselves, which sometimes feel like they're whizzing past me in such an inconsistent manner quality-wise that I feel a little bit under attack, but also the Doctor himself. And my feelings of him, because even when I've enjoyed certain stories, I haven't always been completely enamoured with Jon Pertwee's portrayal of the Doctor. And conversely, there are stories that I haven't really liked very much at all, but I have found myself absolutely enthralled by a really charismatic performance from him. Same is true here. I'm not completely sold on the Mutants still, but I found him utterly engaging throughout. And this time, that carried it a little bit more for me. I have noticed that there's been a shift in the Doctor's character, which hasn't really helped in times that I found myself put off him. There's now a side to his character that Pertwee does incredibly well. It's just that it isn't always an attractive side to the way that Pertwee plays it. I'm talking about the slight shift to him being a very big know-it-all. Now, obviously, yes, the Doctor does know an awful lot and knows an awful lot more than us, so there's always going to be that side of his character. But what I mean is it comes through and it manifests in Pertwee's performance in a way that I find myself sometimes a little bit irritated by it. Other Doctors have done it subsequently far better, and the 2 Doctors before him, this side of the character wasn't there as much, but they were still able to portray the Doctor's vast knowledge without coming across like, a git sometimes. And I am making an important distinction here between genius and know-it-all. A genius is something that the Doctor is. A know-it-all is the Doctor, showing off about it. Hartnell and Troughton's Doctors both had vast knowledge, but they also seemed to still be, learning as they went along and delighting in that. On the other hand, there's a patronising air to Pertwee's Doctor, which implies that he's done all of his travelling already, and he's explored everything there is, and he knows everything there is to know. And that's a factor that's enhanced sometimes by his consistent name dropping in other stories, and frequent, like I said, patronising demonstrations of this vast knowledge. And what that means is that sometimes, through Pertwee's performance, the Doctor, I feel, can come across as arrogant rather than eccentric. For me, the Doctor should be a genius, and the Doctor should sometimes get frustrated that not everybody else is up to his speed. But the way that manifests shouldn't craft the Doctor out to be unlikable. And unfortunately, for me, sometimes Pertwee tips over into that. Now, why am I talking about this particular facet of Jon Pertwee's performance of the Doctor in a video about the Mutants? Well, the reason I bring it up is because there is a moment in this story where the Doctor learns something new, and the way that Pertwee plays it is pure Doctor. And that delight in learning something new, it really resonated with me this time, given how I found myself drifting away from him slightly, ever so occasionally during his era. And it was because of this. And it made me realise in hindsight that this moment here, where the Doctor learns something new and Pertwee plays it to perfection, it made me realise that that's kind of what I'd been missing when Pertwee can walk into the room and already know everything. What he discovers is that the assumption that the mutations the Solonians endure in becoming much as an illness is completely wrong, and that the mutation is not in fact a mutation, but a metamorphosis, a natural part of the Solonians' life cycle. Now this by itself is a rather neat twist, and just in story terms provides a much needed left turn as the story begins to feel a bit stale. But with the Doctor's reaction being such as it is, underplayed by Pertwee, which only makes it all the more wonderful, I'm not just re-engaged with the story, something I'm very thankful for, I'm also re-engaging with the Third Doctor, something I absolutely needed to do. What has helped enormously with that is, for me, I don't think Jon Pertwee has put a foot wrong at all this season. Season 9 may have ever so slightly dropped the ball with Day of the Daleks and, I have to say, the Mutants. But what it's done is present me with a Doctor that I think is, for my money, much improved from Season 8's Doctor. Pertwee might sometimes drift into autopilot, but it's only very occasional in Season 9, or at the very least less detectable. And thankfully he seems really engaged with the Mutants, which is a godsend, because it would be a nail in this story's coffin if he weren't. Another nail, that is, because this story just doesn't grab me anymore. A bit more this time than last time, I have to concede, but there's still the feeling that what good stuff there is, and there is some, is being dragged down by some of the performances and some rather uninspired sets and design. I'm still not fond of the info-dumping wooden guards at the start, which gets the whole thing off to a worryingly bumble beginning, but it naturally picks up when the Doctor and Jo show up, continuing their wonderful repartee. These two have become very quickly one of my favourite TARDIS crews, and it's this season when I start to notice that actually they end up becoming the template for the Doctor-companion dynamic that, on the whole, the show was going to adhere to from this point on going forward. Sure, there would be multiple companions at various points again, but it just feels like the setup of the Third Doctor and Jo, sort of on the whole, feels like it becomes the default for Doctor-companion. Doctor, young female companion, and that's sort of the default template going forward. That's how well the Third Doctor and Jo work together. They are a well-oiled machine by now, and there's a lovely moment which illustrates this perfectly. Beyond all of the very obvious friendship between them, the Doctor signals for her to keep Stubbs talking, which is a subtle gesture, and she picks up on it instantly and proceeds to execute it perfectly. Their relationship isn't just warm, it's fluid now, and the two of them are so very much in sync that even in stories which may be subpar, or, in the case of this one, slight disappointments, watching both of them together can't help but be entertaining. More care has been taken on Jo from a production point of view this season, and is rising to meet Katie Manning's already sterling work. And after her excellent showings in The Curse of Peladon, where she had an engaging story all her own, and in The Sea Devils, where we got to see a more capable Jo in dire straits, she gets separated from the Doctor again here, and goes off to have her own adventure. She acquits herself brilliantly and has another almost action hero moment where she gets the better of the guard and turns his own gun back on him. Sadly, though, guest performances are on the weaker side. Geoffrey Palmer and John Hollis are the notable exceptions here. And John Hollis, who was also a one-time Blofeld, is so good as Sondergaard that his introduction to the story gives it a real boost. I become interested again when he shows up. It's just that generally, from the opening seconds, the performances from the guest cast leave something to be desired. Although, from the opening seconds alone, so does the script. But unfortunately, they do not really improve as the story continues. And this is a shame, because even though it may start clunkily, grinding loudly into first gear once the engine started, the script does have quite a bit of potential. The story, if executed more strongly, could be very, very involving. It's got a good core theme for the Doctor, and this Doctor in particular, to be outraged about. The monumentally arrogant view the humans have and their barbaric approach to Solos and its inhabitants are boo-hiss levels of villainous prickitude, and, as we all know, Pertwee's Doctor can be electrifying when faced with that. Selfishly turning up and deciding to terraform a planet which isn't theirs and isn't even uninhabited is bad enough, but the Marshal's plan to further modify the terraforming so as to make the air deadly for the natives is one of the most dastardly examples of villainy the show has yet depicted. It's atrocious to contemplate such actions, so seeing them implemented should elicit some emotion. And the idea certainly does. It's just that even though the Mutants does give the Doctor something horrible to push against, it doesn't seem to have any trouble unzipping its flyers and slapping its bits about your face. It really isn't subtle, this one, and I'll sometimes watch it and I'll just sort of like be thinking, okay, calm down, I get it. This train wreck level of subtlety is present in a fair few other Doctor Who stories, and sometimes it can come across as, quite charming. It's just that here, it ends up feeling a little bit naive, especially when you consider the story's admirable message and then compare that with its ambition. In the past, I definitely have watched The Mutants and found that naivety charming, whereas here, this time, this viewing, it just left me a little bit cold. There is no denying the ambition present here, though. They are most definitely trying, which is to be commended. When the hull is breached and they risk being sucked out into space, it's a big ask, but it just looks flat. The tools were within reach, though, which leads me to believe it was simply direction and production making a botched job, rather than them reaching too high. So, very underwhelming all in all, which is something I didn't really want to say about the Mutants, but as the story reaches its head, everybody starts overacting and over-enunciating, and this has the effect of just adding to that feeling of, I'm not going to say cheapness, but the naivety. Although it seems that dialogue may have been written that way, in which case the naivety is removed from the performances and placed squarely on the writing. But either way, this then makes the story just feel incredibly immature, and that's not a good approach. For example, I don't believe for a nanosecond that the Marshal would give himself away as quickly as he does when questioned by the Doctor in front of the investigator.
Duty? Your idea of duty was to keep this planet for yourself. The mutants! Much! The diseased! To be wiped off the face of the planet!
Is too big an outburst too early on. It feels unearned in the script, and consequently, I don't believe for a second either that the investigator would return control to the Marshal as readily as he does. It all just feels wrong. And not wrong in the way that I'm invested. If he returns control to the Marshal, you're meant to go, no, don't do that, that's the wrong thing to do. That's not what I mean by wrong. Because instead of doing that, I'm actually going, I know you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that. So it's the wrong kind of wrong. Paul Whitson-Jones isn't terrible as the Marshal, but he isn't as up to scratch as he should be either. Also, his descent into sort of like babbling villainous insanity kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere. So it all just ends up sort of confounding me instead of enthralling me. So as a finished result, it's wildly inconsistent. Some great performances from our leads, some uninspired ones from everybody else. Once upon a time, I enjoyed spending time on Solos, but these days not so much. So you'd be forgiven for thinking that I'm on for a crushing disappointment as this season reaches its final story. A final story which Received Wisdom will tell you isn't much good. But I actually have a soft spot for the Time Monster, and I get it. Fans of the Mutants will have just watched me not much like this story, and then here I am saying that I prefer the Time Monster. But even though that has been the case recently, nothing on this marathon is a given, as you know. So even though, yes, I have enjoyed the Time Monster historically more than most people, I am still approaching it with caution, because you never know. Still, 323 episodes into the marathon now, and part of marathoning is, rolling with taking the rough with the smooth. And I am quite buoyed up by the fact that this time I'm detecting more smooth than rough in season 9 this time around. Easily the Doctor and Jo. As a duo, they are on fire. Cotton, maybe, possibly, contender for worst guest performance in the show so far. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this stopover on Solos, then you know how YouTube works. Please do give it a thumbs up and a big old share. And what are your thoughts on the Mutants? Am I being too hard on it, or do you find it as frustrating as I do? Am I being harshly unfair on some of the guest performances, or do you find they drag the story down for you as well? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for the Season 9 finale. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll meet you at the Newton Institute.